Okay, welcome everyone. I'll get us started. I am Environment Director for the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. My name is Edith Macra, and if you're just joining us, if you would add to your Zoom profile your name, the name of your organization. We have a really good sized crowd here. We're really happy with the turnout, and we just want to keep track of who all is here and encourage you to participate in the discussion as we can via Zoom and chat, just because of the good sized crowd that we have. So just to get started, I am again Edith Macra. I'm filling in for Chairman Kevin Burns, Mayor of Geneva, who will be joining via phone, I think, as soon as he can. So this is the meeting of the Environment Committee of the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, and our topic today is on stretch codes. And I'm really happy to kick off this conversation. We have two guest speakers, and then Cheryl Scott from our team will be giving a few comments as well. We have a lot of slides to get through, so we're going to try to stay on topic with this. It's a really interesting and rich topic. So there's a lot to learn and a lot to get through. As you may know, that robust building energy codes are one of the most impactful strategies that a municipality can use to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And at the Mayor's Caucus, we've been working for a number of years to advocate for strong energy efficiency codes, both with the ICC, or the International Codes Council, and at the state level. We recently scored a victory by helping to reverse the state's decision to weaken the ICC base codes, making our stretch to efficiency a little bit easier. And you'll hear a lot more about what the base code means and what the stretch means from our speakers. And recent legislation, CEJA, or the Climate Equitable Jobs Act, authorizes local governments to stretch beyond the base codes. And the Capital Development Board is now working through a public engagement process and a research phase to create a model stretch code. The state has engaged two expert organizations in this process, and they're both with us today. And we're really lucky to have the expertise of Aaron and Diana joining us to present on the stretch code development process and discuss the proposals that are now being considered. This is very much an opportunity to gather your input and feedback, so we are very interested in your thoughts. And this is an outreach meeting, and we're happy to host this. So I'm going to turn it over to our two experts. One of them is Aaron Sherman, who is a senior associate with the RMI, which used to stand for Rocky Mountain Institute and is now just RMI. RMI is a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to transform the global energy system to secure a clean, prosperous, zero-carbon future for all. Aaron works to align energy codes and building performance standards with state and local climate goals. Prior to joining RMI, Aaron worked for 10 years on behavioral design products such as home energy reports and get out the vote campaigns. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Princeton University. And fun fact, Aaron is an enthusiast in native landscaping. It sounds like pollinator habitat, and she has over 80 species of local plants in her backyard in Maryland. And some of these native plants include buttonbush, cool plant, honeyvine milkweed, and clasping Venus-looking glass. Venus-looking glass, pardon me for that one. That sounds like a cool plant as well. And Diana Burke, who has been on environment committees before and is a good friend to the Mayor's Caucus. She's with the New Buildings Institute, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to push for better buildings that achieve zero energy, zero carbon, and beyond through research, policy guidance, and market transformation. Diana works to establish base and stretch code requirements locally and nationally that combat climate change. She has a BS in physics from Davidson College and a master's in electrical engineering from Princeton University. So there's a theme there. Our speakers are both from Princeton. And fun fact, Diana spent a year in Norway with her family, where she volunteered for a local environmental organization, which is very cool. And so before we turn it over to Aaron and Diana for the main part of the presentation, Cheryl Scott will just give us a little bit of context, both interpreting it for the municipal involvement and just a debrief on the caucus's role that is contemporary, that we should get caught up on. So Cheryl.
Okay, yes, thanks, Edith. Yeah, I'll just set the context quickly before we get to Diana Aaron's presentation. So we've been staying involved with the energy codes and keeping our ear to the ground to let municipalities know about opportunities to get involved. And one of them happened in the past when we were able to tell municipalities about an opening on the council, and we actually had someone nominated who works with Broadview, Darnell Johnson, who I think might be on the call today. I don't know if he's here yet, but so we've had some success with municipal participation, and I've been attending the Illinois Energy Advisory Council meetings, and that's how this opportunity came up for Diana and Aaron to present. They came to us, they saw that we had attended, and they were interested in getting feedback from our members. So we're just happy that we can provide that support to municipalities, because not every municipality has the time to attend all the meetings. There's sometimes several hours of meetings a week, and they can get pretty technical. We do see a few municipalities on the call, but we know that not everyone has the staff to kind of keep on top of all of these opportunities for engagement. And I'll just mention one other opportunity to engage on the stretch codes. We did have the Advanced Building Energy Efficiency Policy Task Force last year. We asked municipalities to get involved if they wanted to possibly implement the stretch code or building performance standards. And we'll stay on top of that work this year with providing resources such as flowcharts, fact sheets, opportunities to provide input on implementing the stretch code. And with some of that input that we've gathered from the task force, the utilities might actually use that to help design programs and incentives. And that'll make it easier for municipalities to implement the stretch code once it's ready. So I guess without further ado, I'll turn it over to Diana and Aaron.
Thank you, Cheryl. All right, I want to overview the agenda just briefly before we get into it. I will give a little bit of an overview conceptually of energy codes and stretch codes, the targets for Illinois' stretch codes, and the process for developing them. Then Diana will get into the fun stuff, which is the content of the stretch codes. We'll start with residential. We thought that that might be a little bit more interesting to some of the folks on this call. And we will try to divide our time so that we have plenty of time for residential Q&A after an overview of what's in that stretch code, such as it's going out for public comment right now, and then hop over to commercial. And along the way, we'll have a couple of moments where we'll ask folks to chime in the chat with what's on their mind. And we'll also have a couple of Zoom polls to check in along the way. Slide, please. So this may be a little bit basic for some of the folks from localities on the call, but just to level set, first wanted to talk about what energy codes are. So among building codes, the energy code sets requirements for new buildings, alterations, and additions with the intention of saving energy. So concerns things like the building envelope, air sealing, as well as the mechanicals that use energy in the home. So in Illinois, energy codes are set at the statewide level and enforced locally. Chicago and some other localities are able to set their own energy codes if they would like to do so. And in terms of the process of how energy codes get updated in Illinois, this is a little bit of an alphabet soup. The Illinois Energy Code Advisory Council, which we sometimes abbreviate as ILECAC or IECAC, they are an advisory body. They are composed of volunteers. They review the latest International Energy Conservation Code, or IECC, after its publication. They're required to do this by law, and the Capital Development Board is required to then undergo rulemaking to update the energy code, and is informed by the advisory council's recommendation as they go through that. CDB ultimately has the authority to update that energy code. Slide, please. So that's the base code that affects the entire state. As Edith mentioned at the top of the call, That update is underway right now in Illinois, and a version with Illinois-specific amendments of the 2021 IECC is anticipated to become the new base energy code. Stretch codes provide a more ambitious option to save more energy, or in some cases, carbon. Localities legislatures can adopt the stretch code for their building officials to enforce instead of the statewide energy code. The first stretch code is scheduled to be available at the end of this calendar year. So a year from now, localities will be able to adopt the stretch code. Localities right now, most localities with some exceptions, can adopt a more efficient commercial energy code than the base energy code, but they're not able to adopt a more efficient residential energy code by state law. The stretch code will offer a standardized option for both residential and commercial buildings, and will provide flexibility that hasn't existed before for most localities on residential efficiency. Slide, please. So I just want to emphasize, again, Edith and Cheryl had characterized this a little bit. Diana and I are supporting the advisory council to consider provisions for the stretch code. And it's very evident to us and to the folks on the council, we're going to make that recommendation to the Capital Development Board, that localities' voices are really important in this process. And in many respects, you all are the most important stakeholders in this process. The Capital Development Board, for its own projects, so for state buildings, will adopt the stretch code, but the entire remainder of its potential impact will come from whether or not localities are able to adopt and implement the stretch code. So your input is really super valuable. Thank you for being here. Slide, please. So what is required in Illinois stretch codes? So the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act directs the Capital Development Board to develop a stretch code by the end of this year, and it has to meet certain energy use targets from that law. Those targets have to be reached, not counting reductions from renewable energy. So in other words, the building itself, kind of independent from any solar panels on its roof or community solar it subscribes to or anything like that, has to be a certain level of energy efficient. And that is described in the law with reference to a past International Energy Conservation Code. For commercial, it has to, buildings under this new code have to use 60% of the energy of that 2006 code. And for residential, it's even lower with reference to that code. It's 50% of the site energy use of that code. So in this process, the Capital Development Board will consider the recommendations that the Illinois Energy Code Advisory Council provides to it. And those recommendations must be provided by the end of July this year. Slide, please. So what do these targets look like? What do they mean? So the graph on the left here shows the progress of energy codes over time. So the left-hand bar is essentially the amount of energy use, the energy use intensity, energy per square foot of buildings under these codes. 2006 is that reference code all the way to the left, and you can see there have been declines in energy use over time, which is what we like to see. And on the right side of that blue line, instead of seeing historical declines, we start to see the Illinois stretch code targets that are in CEJA. So you can see there's a pretty big drop between the 2021 IECC that Illinois is in the process of adopting as its base energy code and the 2023 stretch code target. That's a 22.7% reduction in energy use intensity there. Slide, please. On the commercial side, it's a little bit of a different picture. So you can see, again, on the left, there's been progress over time, reducing the energy use intensity of buildings through codes. And the 2023 target for the Illinois stretch code is not a big departure or a very big cut in energy use intensity compared to the recent reference codes. So that will be perhaps a little bit of a a more moderate leap from the base code. Slide, please. In terms of the timeline, so this timeline for the most part shows the advisory council's process that NBI and RMI are supporting. So right now we are in the first public meeting and public comment period. This is after the advisory council has reviewed potential concepts to include in the code that would result in meeting those targets. And we are accepting public comment from now through February 3rd on that conceptual level code. We say it's conceptual level, and most of the things that we'll cover today, we will cover in as plain language as we can, given that it's about how buildings work. But there are actually reference materials for more details, and I will get into what those are in a couple slides. On the timeline, however, so we have this conceptual cycle right now. We're reviewing just the basics of what could be included in the stretch code and accepting feedback on that. In the next cycle, there will be specific code language drafted and reviewed by the advisory council and a second public comment period around April to provide input into that specific code language. And finally, there will be further meetings of the advisory council to review that code. And by the end of July, that final code is developed and presented as a recommendation to the Capital Development Board. Slide, please. So there are two ways to comment. There are public comment meetings that are set tomorrow and next week. Tomorrow's meeting is on the commercial stretch code. And we also obviously will listen with interest to your comments and questions today, although this is not an official public comment meeting. You can also submit comments in writing by February 3rd, and let me ensure that you all have the links to provide those comments. So the link to provide comments on the commercial stretch code is there. And the link to provide comments on the residential stretch code is there. So those comments can be very brief. They could just be your level of approval or interest of the stretch code concepts as they are drafted right now. And they can also be longer. We're also open to proposals similar to the base code process if you've participated in that in the past. Slide, please. There are also files where you can see in more detail what is in these stretch codes. This is what I mentioned a couple slides ago. So these include references to the material that each amendment from the 2021 IECC, what those basically provisions of the code come from, like what led to them being recommended for consideration by the advisory council. And slide, please, just to see an example of what this looks like. So for residential, you can see each change from the 2021 code has a quick summary, a bit longer of a description, a link to the reference material on the left, and the outcome of the advisory council's vote on this topic in this conceptual cycle. These are linked in those reference links for public comment as well. Slide, please. Okay, so we want to ask you, before we get into the more nitty-gritty, interesting details about the stretch code content, how you're feeling about them so far based on what you know. So I will ask for you to please type in the chat a word, a phrase, a couple words, a couple of phrases describing how you're feeling. And I will ask you to take a few seconds to type those in, and then I will ask folks to hit enter all at the same time. And of course, if you're itching to click through, feel free. But I want to give you a few seconds to think about it. All right. Hoping folks have some stuff typed in. Enter. All right. We're hearing okay, hopeful, too expensive, encouraged, needs to include electrification, interested but cautious. Thank you. I really appreciate hearing from all of you where you're at. It sounds like folks are in diverse places, so let's get right into it and inform where you're at and how you're feeling with a little bit more detail. And I'll turn it over to Diana. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. So if you were able to attend previous Environment Committee meetings, you probably heard me talk about the 5 foundations of zero carbon building policy. I'm bringing these up now because the state stretch code incorporates these foundations to help communities that adopt the stretch code meet their climate goals. The suite involves efficiency first, the most cost-effective way to get to zero carbon emissions. On top of efficiency, we also advocate for policies that address on-site renewable energy, so our buildings can run on cheap electricity from the sun. As we start powering more of our buildings from renewables, we have to start thinking about how to better time our buildings' energy consumption with the time of day those renewables are producing electricity. We can do that through grid integration techniques and energy storage. We also have to stop burning fossil fuels like natural gas in our buildings and start running them on electricity, which can be powered by renewables. And I was happy to see someone in the chat saying electrification was important to them. Finally, we have to start considering life cycle impacts like embodied carbon. Just to note that this last piece on life cycle impacts is not a concept included in the state stretch code. For the purpose of our meeting today, we've broken the major concepts included in the residential stretch code into the topic areas above. I'll also note that many of these concepts came from either or both the residential 2024 IECC, which was released in draft form in November, or the Chicago Energy Transformation Code, which is Chicago's version of the stretch code, which became effective in the city of Chicago in November of last year. We'll begin discussing different pathways for code compliance and how those will change with the state stretch code. We'll move on to discuss the efficiency proposals, which are the most important part because that is how we know we can meet CEJA's stretch code efficiency target. We'll then discuss renewables and grid integration requirements in the stretch code, which we think will help support CEJA's goal of having Illinois run on 40% renewable energy in just 8 years. We'll move on to discuss some of the electrification measures that are proposed for the stretch code, such as electric vehicle readiness and electric readiness, which are requirements similar to the requirements in Chicago's Energy Transformation Code. We'll end by discussing some of the requirements for existing buildings that made it into the stretch code. So first, let's talk about how the stretch code works and pathways to meeting code compliance. There are basically 3 pathways towards meeting the residential energy code today. First, you have to meet some basic mandatory requirements in the code. After that, a builder has 3 options. They can either follow a prescriptive approach, which is basically a recipe that tells them exactly how to build their building to meet code, how much insulation to put in their walls, etc. That's probably the most common way of complying with the residential code in Illinois. If a builder wants more flexibility, they can follow the energy rating index pathway or the performance pathway. In the energy rating index or ERI pathway, the builder would hire a HERS rater, a home energy rating systems rater, and do a simple form of modeling to see if that building meets the ERI score required by the code. The builder could also follow the performance pathway, which would involve more complex energy models. For the ERI, Energy Rating Index pathway and performance pathway, the stretch energy code will differ from the base energy code, the 2021 IECC, because the energy efficiency targets that will have to be hit will be lower to meet CEJA's energy efficiency requirement. The stretch code will also include one improvement to the ERI pathway to improve modeling assumptions related to the ventilation rate, which was proposed. Is a proposed change in the 2024 IECC. The stretch code will also include 2 more pathways towards code compliance that are currently not in Illinois' base energy code. The first pathway is for an above code program called PHIUS, or Passive House Institute US. CEJA specifically called out PHIUS as an above code program that could meet the state stretch code because their homes typically far exceed stretch code targets. PHIUS homes built in Illinois are about 50% more efficient than homes built to the 2023 stretch code energy efficiency target. The other pathway that is proposed for inclusion in the state stretch code is an optional pathway to prove that your home is net zero, which means over the course of the year, the amount of energy used for the building is offset entirely by renewable energy produced for that building. The reason the Illinois ECAC decided to include this pathway is because the Inflation Reduction Act provides a lot of funding and support for the adoption of this net zero code Appendix RC, zero energy residential building provisions. Both of these pathways, however, are proposed to be completely optional pathways. You do not have to build a net zero building or be PHIUS certified to meet the stretch code. But if you do, those will definitely comply. So we wanted to take a minute between each of these sections to give you guys a chance to ask any clarifying questions on any of the concepts I presented. So does anybody have any clarifying questions on alternative compliance path concepts that I just presented? And if you do, please put them in the chat, and then I believe Cheryl will read them out and we can answer them.
Diana, we did have one question come in. It's not as much of a clarifying question, but someone was wondering if there were estimates on how compliance of the codes will impact construction costs on a per square foot basis.
So the question is whether the stretch code will increase construction costs on a per square foot basis.
Yeah, like, is there an estimate of what's, if there was an increase, what that would be on this per square foot basis?
We do not know an estimate of the square foot cost basis of the overall code. However, in the documents that on each of the concepts included, there is, I believe, a column on potential impact on construction costs. So if you wanted to find out whether any of these proposals are cost effective, please go to those spreadsheets, and I believe there is a column that discusses cost effectiveness. I will say that both codes utilize many of the concepts included in the 2024 IACC, and for that process, cost effectiveness was discussed and is a consideration for the committee.
Diana and Aaron, this is Edith. There is one question maybe that would be worth clarifying here in the chat. It's not even a question, just a comment about building performance standards and benchmarking. So do you want to talk about how benchmarking fits into the stretch codes briefly, just to clarify?
Yeah, so stretch codes, both of these codes are primarily for the regulation of construction of new buildings. And if a building undergoes a substantial improvement or alteration or addition, then they would impact those specific improvements. Stretch codes typically don't require existing buildings to report their energy use, which is what a benchmarking policy would do. And they don't require existing buildings to improve their energy efficiency, which is what a building performance standard would do. However, for jurisdictions that are interested in both of those policies and the stretch code, we're hoping to provide support so that we can ensure that the policies are aligned so that a building that is constructed to the stretch code can meet future requirements for a building performance standard or benchmarking.
That's it for clarifying questions. There's some suggestions on additional information, but we'll capture that at the end, just in the interest of staying on time.
Great, thank you. All right, well, I'll move on to the real meat of the stretch code, energy efficiency. in the energy efficiency portion of the stretch code for Illinois. So as Aaron stated, to meet the 2023 stretch code target required by CEJA, homes have to be about 23% more efficient than Illinois' new base energy code, the 2021 IECC. To meet that efficiency target, the Illinois Energy Code Advisory Council approved 2 options for the prescriptive pathway. This is the recipe pathway. So after following the mandatory requirements in the 2021 IECC, which includes specific insulation levels, the builder can do one of 2 things. They can either, 1, install heat pumps for heating and water heating and make sure their buildings are tight with balanced ventilation, or builders are given a very flexible approach and required to attain 30 credits from a list of 37 different efficiency measures that assign a credit value based on the energy efficiency impact of that measure. For pathway 1, builders must put in a heat pump for space heating and a heat pump water heater for water heating. These are 2 of the most efficient appliances on the market today for residential homes and will result in reduced utility bills, a healthier and frankly safer home, and of course, reduce carbon emissions because these appliances are electric and can run on renewable energy from the grid. As an aside, you may not know, but you might already know, starting this year, there will be a lot of incentives for the installation of heat pumps and heat pump water heaters for existing buildings. So depending on your income, you can either get a 30% tax credit or an $8,000 rebate for a new heat pump, or a 30% tax credit or a $1,750 rebate for a new heat pump water heater. In pathway 1, not only do you have to install heat pumps, but you also have to make sure your house is tight and has balanced ventilation. Reducing air leaks in a home is probably one of the most cost-effective ways to improve the efficiency of a home. The current Illinois code requires homes to have an air tightness level of 4 ACH50, which stands for air changes per hour, when tested at 50 pascals by that red thing in the picture called a blower door. The 2021 IECC, so Illinois' base code, which will likely be adopted sometime this year, will reduce that to a target of 3 air changes per hour at 50 pascals. And the stretch code for this pathway will require homes to meet a target of 2 air changes per hour at 50 pascals. An airtight home with efficient balanced ventilation will not only result in more efficient homes, but much more comfortable homes. In addition, that home will be much healthier because you will be introducing clean, fresh air into the home from either an energy recovery or a heat recovery ventilator, instead of having that air leak into your home from a crawl space, basement, or attic. The Illinois Energy Codes Advisory Council didn't want that to be the only pathway to meeting the stretch code target. They wanted to allow a very flexible pathway. This pathway is based on a change approved for the residential 2024 IECC, which requires buildings to achieve a certain number of energy credits. The proposed section R408 in the stretch code requires builders to choose among 37 different efficiency measures and achieve around 30 credits. Each credit is worth about 1% in energy efficiency savings. This results in an average energy efficiency savings around 30%, which is about what you need to meet CEJA's energy efficiency target. Those measures involve options to improve the building thermal envelope, reduce envelope leakage, improve HVAC performance, have better duct thermal distribution systems, install more efficient hot water systems, or more energy efficient appliances. I should note that the exact number of credits, we say it's 30 here, that will be based on modeling, which will be conducted this spring. So do we have any clarifying questions or comments on the energy efficiency concepts I just presented? We'll give it a few seconds to see if anybody has any questions.
the only question that is clarifying is, how does the stretch code interact with major renovations?
That is a really good question. There is a chapter in both the 2021 IECC, and there will be a chapter in the stretch code that is specific to existing buildings. And in that chapter, it clarifies what parts of requirements for new buildings are applicable to major renovations. And we'll talk about adjustments to that chapter later in this presentation for the stretch code.
That catches us up with chat.
Great. Well, keep it moving so we can get through. We have a lot of slides, I apologize. So moving on to renewables and grid integration. The Illinois Energy Codes Advisory Council has decided to incorporate solar ready requirements into the residential stretch code. This requirement is also in the 2024 IECC. What does solar ready mean? It basically means that the home has a solar ready zone on the roof. It has reserved electrical space on the electrical panel and conduit from the solar ready zone on the roof to the electrical panel for future solar panels. Chicago's Energy Transformation Code requires low-rise multifamily buildings to be solar ready as well. Multifamily buildings, if you don't know, those that are 3 stories or less are covered by the residential code, and those that are 4 stories or more are covered by the commercial code. The Illinois Energy Codes Advisory Council, however, decided that for multifamily buildings 3 stories or less, those should meet the renewable requirement for commercial buildings in the commercial stretch code, which we'll talk about later. As many of you know, as we transition towards a renewable grid whose supply varies when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, we need our buildings to demand electricity when there's excess renewable energy supply to improve resiliency, reduce costs and carbon emissions. This is going to be crucial to reduce utility costs for Illinois citizens as the state begins to reach its goal of getting to 40% renewable energy in just 8 years. 2 proposals are in the residential stretch code are included, which would make buildings more grid integrated or demand responsive. The first requires buildings to have demand responsive electric water heaters. This means that the water heater, if you install an electric water heater, that water heater would be able to heat the water when renewable energy supply is high. And there's a second requirement that homes must install demand responsive thermostats. Both of these requirements are included in the 2024 IECC in some form. So any clarifying questions on the renewable energy and grid integration concepts for the residential stretch code?
Yes, we have one question. Does solar ready include moving venting to the north side of the roof to increase the area available for solar?
Solar ready requires a certain percentage of the roof to be a solar ready zone. So if it doesn't specifically require venting to the north side of the roof to increase the area, but if that is required to meet that percent requirement, then it could be something that the builder chooses to do, but it is not an outright requirement. Any other questions?
Oh, I think so. It looks like that's the only question that's come in.
Okay. As an owner, I'm reading the chat. We will get to, I'm seeing a question in the chat, could electrification be required? We'll get to the electrification concepts and next. So I will move on and talk about electrification. So one new item that's proposed for inclusion in the Illinois stretch code and in the 2024 IECC are electrification ready requirements. And these are similar to the ones included for residential buildings and multifamily buildings in Chicago's Energy Transformation Code. This requirement would allow existing buildings to move easily move away from burning fossil fuels towards equipment that can run on clean, renewable electricity. It would also allow building owners the option to protect the health and safety of building occupants without a costly renovation. The proposed provision in the stretch code would require an outlet and electrical capacity for electrical equipment for water heating, cooking, clothes drying, and space heating if that home has combustion equipment installed. So the stretch code currently does not require homes to be all electric, although that is one pathway to meeting the code. We did discuss whether heat pumps for space heating should be a requirement in the stretch code, because that does do a great job of getting towards that energy efficiency target required by CEJA, but the Illinois Energy Codes Advisory Council did not decide to make that a requirement. If a lot of jurisdictions think that should be a requirement, we think you should submit that in public comment for the Illinois ECAC to consider. The stretch code also has electric vehicle ready requirements, which are also in the 2024 IECC and are part of Chicago's Energy Transformation Code. The stretch code would require buildings with parking spaces to install either an EV charger or be EV ready. An EV ready space means that the space has an outlet near the parking space, but no EV charger. EV readiness requirements for multifamily buildings that are 3 stories or less would be required to comply with the requirements in the commercial stretch code, which we'll talk about later. So any clarifying questions on the electrification concepts in the residential stretch code?
There are none.
Okay, I think I see a message from Kim Stone.
Looks like we just had one come in about the discussion about whether EV readiness was appropriate to include in the IECC or the electric code. And so will it be accepted if it's included here?
That has been a point of discussion in several states where electric vehicle readiness requirements belong. And because the 2024 ICC, both residential and commercial drafts include electric vehicle readiness concepts, that's where nationally they are going to belong. So the Illinois Energy Codes Advisory Council agreed that they should also belong in the stretch code.
There's also a question on updates to House Bill 3125 requiring EV readiness. Do you know
I don't have any information on that bill, but it looks like Kim Stone might.
And it sounds like the stretch code might accomplish much of the EV readiness that was intended in that bill.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to existing buildings. So another key requirement that is included in the stretch code and also adopted in the 2024 IECC is a requirement that buildings undergoing additions and substantial energy alterations. And that means over half of 2 or more energy systems, which are defined as your HVAC system, your water heating system, your lighting system, or your insulation systems, if they're being replaced, then you have to meet a portion of the requirements in section R408, and that's the energy credit section that we were talking about, the flexible pathway. So that isn't a requirement for existing buildings that are undergoing additions or substantial energy alterations. The Illinois stretch code also is including new requirements for HVAC systems for existing buildings, which are the same requirements included in the 2024 IECC. These include requirements that HVAC systems undergoing a significant alteration be air tested for airtightness and meet certain testing thresholds. The stretch code will also require HVAC equipment in existing buildings to be right-sized and to require replacement HVAC systems to meet the controls requirements in the code. So these are just 3 additional requirements in the chapter on existing buildings that will improve their performance and comfort. Does anybody have any questions about the existing building requirements in the stretch code, residential stretch code? What is the meaning of substantial? I'm reading in the chat. I'll go back a slide. So substantial energy alteration is defined as an alteration that would mean over half of 2 or more energy systems. So that's your HVAC system, your water heating system, your lighting system, or your insulation systems. If it's 50% or more, then they would have to employ some of the energy efficiency measures in section R408.
There is also a question, can you clarify if test and balancing for residential is a requirement? When you mentioned testing for Man-J compliance, I'm not sure, Craig, what you mean by that, but.
Yeah, so this is a new section in the stretch code and in the 2024 ICC that says if you have an alteration where more than 25% of registers or total length of the ducts are relocated, or the duct system itself is increased by 25%, then you have to do duct testing. You don't have to do balancing, but you do have to do duct testing. And the threshold for the testing threshold is quite lenient. I think it was a 12% duct leakage, whereas for new homes, it's around 4%. And it's included in the 2024 ICC because a lot of people thought that was a reasonable threshold for existing buildings.
Diana, another question, are radon gas exhaust systems considered in the evaluations?
So if you have a radon gas exhaust system, I'm trying to think if that would, I don't think that would be when you're doing so the testing required for existing buildings would only be for duct testing, not for blower door testing or the testing of the envelope. So it would not be included in the duct testing requirements for the code.
I think we can move on. Like I said, we have some good comments and some other questions, but just related to sharing content, I think we should keep going.
Okay, great. Thank you, Edith. So we have covered the major concepts in the residential stretch code. And we have a break right now to talk about just the residential stretch code. We'd love to know if you're interested in exploring the residential stretch code for adoption for your locality. If you're interested in submitting a comment on the stretch code by February 3rd, and if there are anything that you especially like about the stretch code, or if there are any concerns that you have with the stretch code.
I believe we have some multiple choice Zoom poll questions for those first couple.
Okay. Are you able to see the poll questions?
Yes.
Everyone note there are 2 questions there, so you can make sure that you access the second one as well using the gray slider on the side of that pop-up dialog box there.
And for questions 3 and 4 that are on the slide, feel free to answer those in the chat.
Thank you for your responses. One more second here. Looks like most people have answered. Okay, everyone can see the results then?
Yeah, the results look great. It looks like over about half of you are somewhat are interested or very interested in submitting comments on the stretch code. That is great. We want as many comments as we can get from, especially from local municipalities. And then also more than half are either interested or very interested in exploring stretch code adoption for their locality. And it's great news. And it looks like people are answering the questions in the chat.
So we'll capture all the comments in the chat and everyone can take a look at them. But again, I think we should keep going unless there's questions in there that you need to address. A lot of questions about training and existing capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something that we're hoping to do, is hoping the state can support training it in existing capacity. The Department of Energy currently has funding to support work to advance codes nationally, and I think the state is hoping to apply for that funding so that municipalities can be supported in training in additional capacity.
I want to mention a couple of things in response to some of the questions. So in the existing building section that Diana presented, there are several provisions, many of them from the 2024 IECC public comment draft. One provision I believe Diana mentioned, I just want to repeat that there was a vote on with the advisory council, is whether to require heat pumps for space heating. And the council voted not to require that for new buildings. Additionally, there's a vote on whether to require that when air conditioners, central air conditioners are replaced, they're replaced with heat pumps. So basically with a reversible version of the same appliance using the same ductwork. That was also voted no by the council. However, the council has seen those proposals, and if either of those are of interest to folks on the call, those are potential topics for public comment, as well as I'm seeing some comments about electrification or proceeding more quickly toward a lower energy use or carbon emissions. Also seeing various other kind of questions, concerns about the content of the code, and really would encourage folks to submit those in public comments.
Great. I am thinking we should probably move on to talk about the commercial code, just to make sure we have enough time to cover some of the main concepts there. Commercial stretch energy code will be based almost entirely on the 2024 IECC, which was released in draft form in October and will be finalized based on public comment this year. Similar to residential, we'll first discuss different pathways for code compliance, including the performance pathway and above code programs. We'll then talk about efficiency proposals, which are the most important because that is how we know the commercial stretch code can meet its target. We'll then discuss renewable and grid integration requirements in the code, some electrification measures, and then we'll end by discussing requirements for existing buildings. So why start with the 2024 IECC? The Commercial Energy Codes Advisory Council decided to base the commercial Illinois stretch code on the 2024 IECC for several reasons. First, the 2024 IECC meets the efficiency target of CEJA for the 2023 stretch code. Second, we know that Illinois adopts a new code every 3 years and will consider potentially adopting the 2024 IECC possibly in 2026, 3 short years after the stretch code becomes available. So by adopting the 2024 IECC as the stretch code, the design and construction industry working in the jurisdictions that have adopted the stretch code will be well prepared for base code adoption in other jurisdictions. Third, because the stretch code will be updated again around the same time the 2024 IECC will be adopted as base code, we can pretty much guarantee that the stretch code will be more stringent than the base code. And then finally, the commercial 2024 IECC was vetted thoroughly by a consensus development process. So let's talk about provisions in the 2024 IECC plus other provisions in the stretch code. So in the commercial code, there are basically 2 paths towards meeting complying with the energy code. First, you have to meet some mandatory requirements in the code. And after that, you can either follow the prescriptive pathway, which, like residential, is basically a list of things you have to do to meet the code, the specific installation requirements, etc. Or you can follow the performance pathway, which involves more complex energy models. Right now, the performance pathway in the code is based on reducing utility costs compared to the baseline building. To align with the site energy use intensity requirements in CEJA, the stretch code performance pathway will instead be based on site energy use instead of energy cost. This approach is included in a proposed optional change to ASHRAE 90.1 2019. Like the residential stretch code, the commercial stretch code will also include 2 more pathways towards code compliance that are currently not in the base energy code. The first pathway is for FIAS. As for residential, CEJA specifically called out FIAS as an above code program because their homes far exceed stretch code targets. FIAS commercial buildings built in Illinois exceeds the stretch code by 50 to 85%. The other pathway, like residential, is an optional pathway to prove that the commercial building is a net zero energy building. Like the residential group, the reason the Illinois ECAC decided to include this pathway is because the Inflation Reduction Act provides a lot of funding and support for the adoption of a net zero code. But again, both of these will be completely optional and not required as part of the stretch code. Any clarifying questions on the pathways for commercial? I'm reading one from Jim Schwartz. Are the pathways chosen by municipalities adopting the stretch code, or does each developer business have the choice about which pathway to take in a municipality that has adopted the stretch code? That's the intent is for the second to be true, that a municipality wouldn't say that the stretch code, their stretch code is going to require FIAS certified buildings, for example, but that a builder in a jurisdiction that has adopted the stretch code can certify their building as a FIAS certified building, and if they do, then it would automatically meet the stretch code requirement. Any other clarifying questions on compliance pathways? All right, I'm going to move on in the interest of time. So let's talk about the energy efficiency provisions in the commercial code. The energy efficiency provisions in the commercial Illinois stretch code will be almost identical to the requirements in the draft 2024 IECC. For buildings going the prescriptive pathway, one of the most impactful new requirements in the 2024 IECC and will therefore be included in Illinois stretch code is a revision to section C406. And And the 2021 IECC, which will be adopted soon statewide by Illinois, includes 16 energy efficiency measures in that section and requires buildings to get 10 credits from that section. Each credit is worth 2.5% cost savings, so that results 0.25% cost savings, resulting in a total cost savings of 2.5%. The proposed revision increases the number of efficiency measures from 16 to about 31 and requires more points. It requires about 30 to 90 points, which results in an average savings of about 7%. The point value also changed from 0.25% to 0.1%. The efficiency measure options include options to improve the building thermal envelope, reduce envelope leakage, improve HVAC performance, install more efficient hot water systems, have better lighting performance, install more efficient elevators, and more efficient kitchen equipment. When PNNL presented this code change, the committee on the 2024 IECC, they showed us how many possible credits you can achieve in most typical building types in each climate zone. For reference, 90 points, that red line, is the maximum requirement across all building types. And as you can see in this figure, most building types have quite a few options to choose from to achieve those 90 points in Illinois' climate zone 4 and 5, which is indicated by this green bar here. Another pretty impactful measure, which is included in the Illinois Commercial Stretch Code and is also in the 2024 IECC, is a requirement to address thermal bridging in the energy code. Thermal bridges, as you can see from this picture, can have an oversized impact on the performance of the thermal envelope and thus a building's energy use. Reducing the thermal performance of opaque building envelopes by between 20 and 70%. The proposed addition to the 2024 IECC and Illinois Stretch Code addresses common thermal bridges in commercial buildings like balconies, slabs, and decks, cladding supports, structural beams and columns, vertical fenestration, and parapets. There's a similar requirement in Chicago's Energy Transformation Code, but the requirement in the Stretch Code will be stronger. The 2024 IECC also added more stringent requirements for horticultural lighting. Illinois and Chicago is proposing an amendment to the base code to the 2021 IECC to align the lighting requirements for all horticultural lighting for cannabis facilities in Illinois, which is even stronger than what's currently in the draft 2024 IECC. So the Illinois Stretch Code will amend the draft 2024 IECC and keep this stronger requirement of a photosynthetic photon efficacy, or PPE, of 2.2 micromoles per joule for indoor growing spaces and 1.7 micromoles per joule for greenhouses. Any questions on the efficiency measures that I just presented?
There's a lot of discussion about choice and cost, but I don't know if I'd call those clarifying questions. It's a fascinating conversation. People can follow along. And again, more questions about training and tools. And there is a question about the 2021 IECC, one that's expected to be finalized and go into effect.
Sonia, I don't know the answer to that question. I think it will be finalized sometime this year and go into effect sometime later this year. I think they're starting to initiate a rulemaking process to use the 2021 IECC with only strengthening amendments and no weakening amendments soon, but I don't, yeah. Erin, do you remember any timeline questions?
So at this time, as I understand it, the stretch code, the statewide energy code based on the 2021 IECC has not yet been submitted for rulemaking to JCAR. And that process takes some time and sometimes can be subject to some delays. So it is a bit difficult to say, but I would say compared to the prior timeline where the rulemaking process was almost complete a month or two ago, this will be much more closely aligned with the stretch code availability timeline. So there's less likely to be an awkward period, if you will, during which you might have just adopted the 2021 based code and then you face a question about adopting the stretch code. I also want to note, we have questions about providing a cost analysis for the stretch code, and the kind of best reference or the gold standard for a cost analysis for energy code in the US are the determinations published by the Department of Energy and conducted by Pacific Northwest National Labs, PNNL. And we are hoping that PNNL will complete a determination for the stretch code, and that is in consideration for that application for Department of Energy, US Department of Energy funding that Diana mentioned earlier. PNNL also attempts to be responsive to requests like that, but they often have a lot of requests like that. So the exact timing is not clear. So that is something that we are certainly hoping for. Diana, is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, that is a very fair characterization. I'm looking in the chat. Marcelo wants a link to the determinations. There are links to the determinations that have already been conducted for the 2021 IECC in Illinois. Those are on the energycodes.gov website. Probably link them in the chat, but the stretch code determination has not been conducted yet. All right, let's move on and talk about the renewables and grid integration proposed requirements in the stretch code. So another proposal that made it into the 2024 IECC and therefore will be included in Illinois stretch code is a new prescriptive requirement for on-site renewable energy, which will provide around 10% of the average commercial building's energy use. The requirement states that buildings must install 0.75 watts of renewable energy per square foot of conditioned floor space for the 3 largest floors of a building. There's not enough roof space, too much shading, or not enough solar exposure, a building is required to purchase renewable energy offsite. According to Pacific Northwest National Laboratory's analysis, this proposal was cost effective without tax credits or incentives. With the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act and CEJA, which adds both federal and state incentives for renewables, we think this requirement will be very cost effective in Illinois. On another note, Chicago's Energy Transformation Code did not require solar on buildings, but does require low-rise commercial buildings to be solar ready. As many of you know, grid integration measures are important in Illinois for resiliency, reducing utility costs and carbon emissions. 4 proposals got into the commercial 2024 IECC, and therefore will be included in Illinois' commercial stretch code, which will make buildings more demand responsive. The first requires buildings to have demand responsive thermostats, which can pre-cool or preheat a building when renewable energy supply is high. The second requires electric water heaters in buildings to be demand responsive, meaning the water heater would be able to heat water when renewable energy supply is high. A third proposal, the requirement for demand responsive lighting, and the fourth requires buildings to either install energy storage in their building or be energy storage ready, which means they have a space in their building for a future energy storage system. None of these proposals require one to hook up the appliance with a demand responsive program. In addition to these 4 mandatory requirements above, the new revision to section C406, which is the energy credit section proposed by PNNL for the 2024 IECC and therefore will be included in the commercial stretch code, requires buildings to achieve a certain number of credits for either renewable energy or choose among 7 grid integration options. The credits are based on time of use energy cost and result in a roughly 7% cost savings for building owners. It's similar to a code amendment that will be in Illinois' base code, or proposed for Illinois' base code, and a code amendment in Chicago's energy transformation code in that section in the 2021 IECC. Any clarifying questions on renewables and grid integration requirements before we move on?
Diana, we do have a question about what responsive lighting means.
Yeah, what responsive lighting means. So if a building installs, it's basically controls for your lighting. If a building installs specific demand responsive controls for their lighting, and they sign up for a demand response program from their utility, which is not a requirement, then the utility can, for example, dim the lighting if there's an event where they want to reduce the energy consumption of the building at a particular point in the day. So that is what demand responsive controls for lighting would mean. I don't believe the lighting would dim any emergency or crucial lighting uses in the building, only lighting controls for not crucial uses, emergency uses. Any other questions?
And there are 2 requests, which looks like Aaron's already responsive to. Almost you want to answer that, Aaron, comparison of the 2021 IECC and the stretch code.
Yeah, so the entire kind of spate of differences between the 2021 IECC and the proposed stretch code in draft form for public comment right now is summed up in these spreadsheets. And you can see the source material in many cases showing strikeout underline language for what exactly has changed in the column to the left on these spreadsheets.
I think that's it for clarifying questions.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on. We have 2 more topic areas. The Illinois EPAC will also include electric ready requirements in the commercial stretch code. These requirements are not in the commercial 2024 IECC, but were proposed in the public comment period for inclusion. So they could be in the final draft. Electric ready requirements are included in Chicago's energy transformation code for multifamily buildings, covered under the commercial code, and single family buildings under the residential code. And like residential, they would require, they would allow existing commercial buildings to move more easily away from burning fossil fuels towards electric equipment that can run on clean renewable electricity. It would also allow building owners the option to protect the health and safety of building occupants by requiring electric outlet and electrical capacity in the building. As mentioned earlier, the Illinois stretch code will also require buildings with parking spaces to install electric vehicle chargers, be electric vehicle ready, or be electric vehicle capable. An electric vehicle ready space means that the space has an outlet near the parking space, but no EV charger. An electric vehicle capable space means the building has the electrical capacity for an EV charger and conduit from the panel to the space, but no outlet or charger. And of course, the EVSE space, or electric vehicle supply equipment space, means that the space has a level 2 EV charger installed. In the commercial code, the requirements vary by building type. For example, multifamily buildings, which are group R2 occupancy, are required to install chargers in 20% of their spaces. They would be required to make 5% of their spaces EV ready, and the remaining 75% of parking spaces must be EV capable. Making sure multifamily buildings have EV chargers is crucial because the majority charging is done at home. The proposal in the IECC and thus in the Illinois stretch code was crafted by national experts and took the most cost-effective common sense policies being adopted across the country, and includes quite a few improvements to local electric vehicle readiness ordinances. Any clarifying questions on the electrification concepts?
I'm not seeing clarifying questions, but I am seeing again some suggestions, which I think are useful, and maybe you could help guide some folks how to make these comments or their suggestions if they are commenting on stretch codes.
Yeah, if your comment is on an improvement to the stretch code concepts we presented, we'd love to consider them. And you can fill out that Google form that Aaron shared earlier in the presentation, or submit a letter of to the Capital Development Board by February 3rd. All right, so the last topic, and I know we only have 10 minutes left, so I will try and speed through this in case there are any other questions at the end of the presentation. The last topic is on existing buildings. A key requirement similar to a requirement in the residential side of the code is a requirement that buildings undergoing substantial energy alterations, meaning if over half of 2 or more energy systems, the HVAC, water heating, lighting, or insulation systems are being replaced, then they have to get a small portion of the credits required for new buildings. This would be equivalent to 1% building energy savings for alterations, or about a 3.5% energy efficiency savings for additions. The Illinois ECAC also approved a strengthening change for the Illinois stretch code, requiring buildings that use natural gas. If you're going to add new natural gas under a substantial alteration, that you have to implement additional efficiency credits, more credits than would be required by the building that chooses to be all electric. The Illinois stretch code also has a few additional requirements for HVAC systems, such as requiring duct testing for alterations, requiring HVAC equipment in existing buildings to be right-sized, and to require retro commissioning if the HVAC system in an existing building is replaced. These are all measures in the 2024 IECC. The stretch code also includes additional energy monitoring requirements for more building types, and requires buildings to sub-meter energy use for EVs. These requirements, which are also in the 2024 IECC, are crucial to help existing buildings meet new building performance standards, which several municipalities in Illinois might be considering. Without sub-metering, building managers would not be able to determine what systems are consuming energy, and this would be put at a disadvantage if they were asked to reduce their building's energy use. And without monitoring for electric vehicles in place, they would not know how much of energy is being used by the building versus how much is being used by the electric vehicles charged in spaces by the building. The Illinois ECAC also approved 2 measures that are not in the 2024 ICC, and they're especially interested in public comment on these measures based on research by CLASP, which is a nonprofit based in DC. NBI crafted model language in our existing building decarbonization code, requiring new and replacement AC units to be heat pump equipment. So any existing space heating systems could be converted to supplementary heat. Heat pumps are about the same price as AC units, and the Inflation Reduction Act is incentivizing the replacement of AC units with heat pumps via tax credits or rebates. This requirement would therefore cost effectively start to transition fossil fuel burning equipment in our existing buildings and begin to electrify them at minimal cost to building owners. And again, we are especially interested in public comment on this proposal. Another requirement that the Illinois ECAC approved for public comment is a requirement that would require buildings undergoing a substantial improvement. That means they would spend more than 50% of the improvement would be 50% of the market value of the building, which is quite a lot. This requirement would begin to improve the efficiency of existing buildings by requiring that buildings undergoing that substantial energy alteration to meet a certain energy efficiency score in the ASHRAE standard 100. These scores are in line with scores required for these buildings to be considered an ENERGY STAR certified commercial building. So those are all of the measures, I believe. If anybody has any clarifying questions on existing building concepts or other questions with regard to the entire code process, we would love to know. And do we have 2 more poll questions, Cheryl and Edith, on commercial stretch code adoption? Great.
Yes.
And I believe I saw a question on how is market value determined, as you guys are answering the question. I believe market value is determined by replacement cost of the building. So if you were to rebuild the building today, how much would that cost? And so the substantial improvement would have to be at least 50% of that cost.
And for questions 3 and 4 on the slide, what do you like about the commercial stretch code? What are your top concerns? If you could just add those answers to the chat. Thanks.
%50 is based on cost or square footage of the work. 50% is based on cost.
2 more seconds on the poll, but thank you all for answering that.
There's another question above that in the chat from Jim.
And municipalities currently require that new buildings be fully electric outside of the stretch code, given that requirement is not currently possible within the stretch code as written. I think Aaron tried to reply to that question in the chat as well. I think you could, in the public comment period, we would love if you would comment and I request one of 2 things. Either you could say, can the stretch code require fully electric buildings? I think the Illinois ECAC was hesitant to require this because that would possibly mean fewer jurisdictions would adopt the stretch code. But if you think that's not the case, then please let us know. Or as Aaron noted, you can request that the stretch code include an optional appendix that would require new construction to be all electric. And so a locality could adopt that optional appendix along with the stretch code.
One other note on this topic is that for commercial energy codes, all localities, regardless of size or whether they have home rule privileges based on when they had adopted energy codes previously, any locality can adopt a more stringent energy code for commercial buildings. So any localities on this call have that option available to them, whether or not they adopt the stretch code.
Great. And I'm also seeing great responses on the poll with more than 3/4 of you participating. It looks like over 63% are either interested or very interested in adopting the commercial stretch code. And then roughly, again, half of you are somewhat interested or interested in submitting public comment. I think that is great.
And with that response for the interest in submitting comments, can you just review the process and timeline? And we went over it at the beginning of the call, but.
Yes, Aaron, do you want me to go back to those slides?
We may have a slide at the end. Might be the next slide, unsure.
Oh, yes, it is the next slide, sorry.
Great
Yep.
minds think alike.
So there are 2 public comment meetings. One of them is tomorrow. One is on the 23rd. There's information about time and WebEx links on the Capital Development Board website. And I imagine many of the folks on the line here also are on the email list that receives information about those meetings. I will also, once again, put the web forms for written comment into the chat. And these will also be shared after. There, that is. I also see a question from David. Can a non-home rule community adopt a stretch code? So once the stretch code is available in 2024, any locality can adopt the stretch code that has been published by the state. Right now, any locality can adopt a stretch code in quotation marks, a more stringent or more efficient, or at least not less efficient commercial energy code. That is an option available to any locality at this time. Only home rule communities can do that for residential energy codes at this time. I hope that that is helpful. And Sonia, once the stretch code is available, it will be used by the Capital Development Board for new projects.
So we are just about at time. So any closing comments? Erin or Diana?
I would like to thank all of you for coming to this meeting and for all of your comments in the chat today. If you have any other clarifying questions that you would like us to answer that we weren't able to get to at the meeting, you can contact me or Erin. Our email addresses are on this slide. And yeah, we look forward to your comments during the public comment period.
Thank you so much for that outstanding presentation and for helping us really learn about the very complicated and really important processes. So I do encourage the communities on the line here to get involved. It's been really, it's been an interesting process for us to get involved in energy codes, and sometimes we win and sometimes not, but I really feel it's important for municipalities to express their views. So thank you for educating us so that we can. We'll close on behalf of Mayor Burns, who is on the line but having connection problems. So just in closing, thank you so much for your presentation, and to all of you for being here. A very strong turnout, and most of you stuck with us. So thanks for those great questions and comments. Reminder, next Environment Committee meeting, it's always the third Tuesday of the month, and we are sticking mostly with Zoom, although we are planning some in-person events. But the next meeting is looking at revenue from natural assets in your community, and we have two speakers. One on Storm Store, looking at stormwater value of open space and natural areas, and then the other one on trees, Chicago Regional Trees Carbon Program. So that meeting will be Tuesday, February 21st from 10 to 11:30 via Zoom. And just a note, many of you are enrolled in our Energy Academy. We are overwhelmed with responses. We were able to offer this academy one time. We've had to double our course capacity, so we now have to offer 2 classes, and we are at capacity. So I apologize to those of you that were not represented or not able to participate, but we'll be sharing recordings of that. So again, thank you for your strong interest in this, and have a wonderful day, and thank you for being here. We'll see you next time.